Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Tales of the Bizarre Season 3 Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story begins with a psychic who recently gained fame for her claim that she could summon the spirit of Sherlock Holmes. Hearing this, a television station immediately sent a crew, along with a mystery novelist named Nakayama, to film a segment at her location. Nakayama, however, was a complete skeptic. After walking down a long corridor, they met the psychic, a woman who appeared to be in her 60s or 70s and was rather nearsighted, explaining that she needed a magnifying glass to see things clearly. After learning the TV station's purpose, the psychic immediately began a ritual to summon Holmes. As she chanted, the room was filled with wind and fire. Whether it was real or not was unclear, but the effect was certainly dramatic. A moment later, the psychic turned to face them. Her demeanor completely changed. She asked who had summoned her and complained about how cold it was in Japan. The show's host was thrilled, announcing to the camera that Sherlock Holmes had truly appeared. Nakayama, however, remained unconvinced. He questioned why Holmes, an Englishman, was speaking fluent Japanese. The psychic didn't answer, instead just repeating that she was cold. Nakayama pressed on, stating that as far as he knew, Holmes had never visited Japan in his life, so this had to be a fake. At this, the psychic retorted that she had visited in secret and didn't need to inform him. Nakayama then asked what she did during her visit, but she again dodged the question, only moaning about being in pain and cold. Seeing this, the psychic's son quickly intervened, telling Nakayama to stop, as the channeling was unstable and dangerous. He suggested changing the question before something terrible happened. Nakayama, however, believed this was just a typical scammer's trick. To stabilize the spirit, the psychic's son resumed chanting. A short while later, the psychic did indeed seem to calm down. The host declared that this was the real Sherlock Holmes, but Nakayama, still skeptical, began quizzing her on Holmes's birthday, the address of his detective agency, and cases he had worked on. Although the old woman answered every question correctly, Nakayama felt something was still off. He then challenged her to deduce his profession. Upon hearing this question, the psychic began to falter again, which confirmed for Nakayama that she was an imposter. When they first arrived previously, Nakayama had noticed a room next to the dojo. Inside, a bookshelf was filled entirely with books about Sherlock Holmes. There was a pair of reading glasses on the desk and an extra pair of shoes on the floor. The psychic had said she used a magnifying glass, which meant the reading glasses belonged to someone else, the owner of the extra shoes. Nakayama concluded that someone was behind the scenes, helping the psychic with her act, and that person was likely her husband, who had yet to appear. He believed the family of three was running a fraudulent scheme. He also noted that while the house supposedly had only 2 rooms, they had walked down an unusually long corridor, suggesting a hidden room behind the dojo where the husband was likely hiding. Ignoring the son's protest, Nakayama prepared to pull back the curtain at the back of the dojo. But what he saw behind it was not a hidden man, but a memorial portrait. The son explained that his father had passed away 2 months ago, but his mother refused to accept his death and still kept his shoes at the entrance. Nakayama remained unconvinced, but he couldn't find any secret compartments anywhere. Just then, the psychic seemed to wake from her trance. She stated that she knew Nakayama was a mystery novelist. When he asked how she knew, she explained it was a simple deduction. His bloodshot eyes and rough skin, combined with his habit of subconsciously touching the callus on his right middle finger, were clear signs of a writer who toiled late into the night. She added that while he was well-versed in criminal methods, he was overly self-absorbed and projected his own ideals onto famous detectives, a classic trait of an unpopular mystery novelist. The host was ecstatic and rushed to the psychic's side to praise her, but with a few compliments, the psychic got carried away. She started talking about a famous fictional Japanese detective often called the Sherlock Holmes of the Edo period, and mentioned that her idol actor had once played him. She pleaded with the host to get her an autograph. The more she talked, the more excited and outlandish she became, completely forgetting she was on a live broadcast and exposing her own act. Her son, seeing things go south, rushed over to calm her down. In the confusion, he accidentally bumped a hidden switch, and her supposedly dead husband comically appeared from a secret panel. It turned out the seance was indeed a family scam all along. The second story begins with Ryoko heading to school and noticing her classmates secretly writing something, hiding it whenever she tried to look. After asking, she learned about a spell involving a green ballpoint pen that had become popular at their school. The rule was to write down a wish 1,000 times with a green pen before midnight, and the wish would come true. When Ryoko first heard this from her classmates, she was completely skeptical. She thought, if wishes could be granted so easily, who would even bother going to school? Everyone would just stay home making wishes. However, her classmates were firm believers. Whenever they had a spare moment, they would be furiously scribbling in their notebooks with their green pens. The next day, a classmate excitedly told Ryoko that her wish had come true. She had wished for a red wallet, and her father had bought one for her that very morning. Now, she was going to make a new wish, to start dating a boy named Saki. Hearing this, Ryoko's mood instantly soured. Saki was her neighbor and childhood friend. Although they often bickered and teased each other, she had feelings for him. Even though she didn't believe the spell could actually grant her classmate's wish, the thought of Saki ending up with another girl was deeply unsettling to her. She spent the rest of the day completely distracted. That afternoon, another classmate's wish was granted. The basketball team she had wished good luck for won their game. The girl excitedly shared the news with everyone, including Ryoko. As the others celebrated, Ryoko grew more anxious, wondering if this thing actually worked. If it was real, what if someone else wished for Saki and took him away? Deciding it was better to be safe than sorry, Ryoko resolved to try it for herself. After buying a green ballpoint pen from an old woman, Ryoko's busy day began. She wrote Saki's name whenever she had a free moment. That evening, just as she finished writing his name for the 1,000th time, she received a phone call from Saki. He asked if she was free on Saturday and wanted to ask her out. She replied that she had a badminton tournament, and that was the end of that. The next day, however, her classmate excitedly told Ryoko that her wish had been granted again. She explained that Saki had bought 2 concert tickets and invited her to go with him. Ryoko was furious. With no other options, she went home and poured all her energy into writing Saki's name again. But as she wrote, the pen suddenly ran out of ink. A glance at the clock showed it was almost 11 p.m. Desperate for her wish to succeed, Ryoko had to go out immediately. But when she arrived at the shop, she was shocked to find Saki there as well. They both claimed they were there on an errand, but neither would reveal their true purpose. After getting a new pen from the old woman, Ryoko rushed back home. Finally, just before midnight, she managed to write Saki's name 1,000 times. Ryoko was overjoyed, feeling certain that this time, her wish would work. At the same time, Saki had also finished writing Ryoko's name 1,000 times just before the deadline. Both of them felt a strange sense of satisfaction and slept soundly that night. But the next morning, when their wishes came true, something had gone terribly wrong. They had swapped bodies. It turned out their wishes had been too vague and were misinterpreted. At that moment, on a park bench, a middle-aged man was seen repeatedly writing the words, "young wife." Ryoko's classmate saw him and offered a piece of advice. He had to write clearly, he wants a young wife, otherwise he might just turn into a young bride himself. And that's where the story ends, a reminder that one must be very careful when making a wish. The third story begins with Kawatani running into his lover Akiko on his lunch break. She handed him a key and shyly mentioned that it had been a while since he had visited. Seeing she was unhappy, Kawatani immediately promised that he would use the key to open her door that very night. After parting ways and agreeing to meet later, Kawatani noticed a line of people. Or rather, he noticed a beautiful, sexy woman in the line. He walked over to strike up a conversation, asking what everyone was queuing for. The woman simply replied that it was for that. Kawatani didn't understand what that was, and his confusion earned him a playful smile from the woman and curious stares from everyone else. Just then, a young man came up behind him and asked if this was the queue for that. Kawatani was completely bewildered. They all kept saying that, but what on earth was it? He wanted to ask the young man how he understood from just that one word. The more secretive they were, the more curious Kawatani became. He checked the time. It was past lunch, and it didn't look like a sale. As he pondered, an older woman approached and asked how to get to the queue for that. The young man told her this was it. Kawatani began to suspect it might be related to some new religious cult. As more people joined the line behind him, Kawatani's curiosity grew overwhelming. He decided to just get in line and see where it led. Just then, his phone rang. It was his boss. Kawatani was about to answer, but the signal was poor, so he asked the young man behind him to save his spot while he stepped away to take the call. Once he found a good signal, he heard his boss tell him not to bother coming back to the office that afternoon. Everyone from the office was gone, having all gone to join that queue. His boss said he was heading there too and told Kawatani to go ahead if it was convenient. He hung up abruptly, giving Kawatani no time to ask what that was. When Kawatani returned to his spot, he found that the young man and the beautiful woman were now embracing for a smelly hormone yoga session. They completely ignored him. It was impossible to get back in between them, and without the young man to vouch for him, he now looked like someone trying to cut in line. Defeated, Kawatani decided to walk to the end of the queue, but he walked for a very long time, then ran, and still couldn't see the end. At some point, the line had become impossibly long. Just as he was about to collapse from exhaustion, a taxi pulled up beside him. Kawatani said he wasn't looking for a ride, but the driver replied that the end of the queue was far away. After a moment's hesitation, Kawatani got in. On the way to the end of the line, Kawatani saw Akiko, now nestled in the arms of another man looking perfectly happy. Kawatani wanted to tell the driver to stop, but then he let it go, knowing he had no right to stop her. Looking up, he noticed the taxi driver had turned into a no-entry zone. The driver explained it was a shortcut, but the tunnel they entered seemed endless. In a daze, Kawatani imagined Akiko was with him, stroking him and telling him she would love him forever. When he snapped out of it, he realized he was stroking the driver's hand. He tried to pull away, but the driver held on, remarking on how beautiful his fingers were. After a moment, the driver let go. Kawatani asked him if he knew what the queue was for. The driver simply replied that it was the queue for that. Finally, they emerged from the tunnel. The sky was now dark. They had found the end of the line. Kawatani tried to pay, but by the time he got his wallet out, the driver was already in line. Kawatani hesitated for only a few seconds, but in that time, a dozen more people ran past him. Without further thought, he quickly joined the queue. The moment he was finally in line, Kawatani felt a surge of joy and satisfaction. But when he looked ahead, he saw that in just a moment of hesitation, the distance between him and the taxi driver had grown immense. His good mood vanished instantly. Still, there was nothing to do but wait patiently. He couldn't even remember why he was so determined to stand in this line. As the moon rose high in the sky, Kawatani was cold and hungry. Just then, a delivery boy handed him a meal, saying it was from the taxi driver up ahead. The two men looked at each other and smiled. After eating, he continued to wait. A very, very long time passed, and finally Kawatani could see the front of the line. The taxi driver, before going in, gave him a polite nod. Kawatani watched as the people in front of him went inside, one by one. But just as it was his turn, a staff member announced they were closing for the day and shut the gate. Kawatani didn't understand what was happening. When he turned around, the massive shoulder-to-shoulder crowd that had been there just a moment ago had completely vanished. He was all alone. A wave of anxiety and rage washed over him, a gut-wrenching feeling of being left in limbo. He felt like he could kill someone. He screamed out, asking where his cue had gone, and that is where the story ends. The fourth story begins at a seance where a spiritual master chanted an incantation and a female medium collapsed. The master then told the client that his mother's spirit had been summoned into the medium's sexy body. The medium spoke, mentioning that the man had fallen from a persimmon tree behind his house and injured himself in the first grade. These words convinced the man. But as he tried to approach the medium, Yoko, she quickly backed away, claiming that he was tainted by a negative presence. She explained that this presence was blocking his good fortune and causing him to struggle in the national diet, and it had to be removed immediately. The man, convinced, paid $5 million to resolve the issue. In return, he received some paper talismans and a pot-like object. After the man left, the spiritual master dropped his facade. He was, in fact, a con artist. Before each session, they would thoroughly investigate their target. Details like the injury on his rear were all part of the information he had gathered. From the $5 million they scammed, he only gave his partners, Lion and Yoko, $50,000 each. Yoko was furious, complaining that for such little money she might as well go back to being a hostess at a bar. But Lion wouldn't let her. Besides, she had nowhere else to go. Yoko was the woman who had not only stolen money from a temple, but had also lured Lion, a fake monk from that same temple, away with her. To get more money from the master, Yoko threatened to confess everything to the police. However, the master turned the tables, threatening to kill both her and Lion if she dared. After all, he had killed before. Unable to leave and unable to get more money, Yoko was seething. Later, a chance opportunity allowed Yoko to find out that the woman the master had murdered years ago. She decided to play a prank on him. During a session that evening, Yoko pretended to be possessed by the woman's spirit. She revealed the truth of the murder and declared she had come to claim the master's life. This stunt scared away the client and enraged the master. Furious, he decided to teach Yoko a lesson she would never forget. Just as he was about to seriously harm her, Lion intervened at the critical moment, knocking him out with a blunt object. Seeing the master on the floor, both of them panicked. Yoko was the first to regain her composure. She immediately searched the master's body and found a key to a safe. Inside, she was thrilled to discover over 50 million. She and Lion prepared to take the money and run. However, the master wasn't dead yet. Sensing his beloved money was about to be taken, he sat up abruptly to settle the score. Panicked and feeling they couldn't win a fight, Yoko and Lion immediately fled. But as the master caught up to them, something strange happened. The spirit of the woman he had murdered actually appeared. She possessed Lion's body. Speaking in a woman's voice, Lion declared that he had been killed by the master and was here for revenge. The master didn't believe it, thinking it was just another clumsy act, and stabbed him with a knife. But the possessed Lion said it was useless. As long as she was in this body, the person could not die. With that, she breathed a blast of hellfire, setting the master ablaze. Finally, the woman dragged the master to hell. He vanished without a trace. Yoko and Lion inherited his 50 million. The scene then changes to show Yoko and Leon continuing their scams, conning new clients out of their money. The fifth story begins with a city filled with the noise of construction at this time of year. Ayako was a novelist. Normally, when her work was going smoothly, the noise didn't bother her much. But now, as she was trying to finish her novel, the incessant racket was driving her to distraction, making it impossible to write. Finally, she had no choice but to tell her editor the truth. The editor panicked. Readers were eagerly awaiting the ending, and she couldn't just stop updating. So he pulled some strings and found a very special hotel for her, a place that was exceptionally quiet. He sent her there, confident that she would be able to write the perfect conclusion. Ayako drove through the tunnel and entered a secluded paradise. By the roadside, a large sign read, "All noise strictly prohibited ahead." At the time, Ayako didn't seem to notice it. A little further on, she saw a woman kneeling and praying before a roadside statue. She asked the woman for directions to the hotel. Ayako noticed the woman seemed reluctant to speak, simply pointing forcefully ahead, as if urging her to leave quickly. When she arrived at the hotel her editor had recommended, Ayako found that it was just as quiet as he had described. The lobby lights were off, and all the sofas were covered with dust cloths. There was a rather old, weepy bellboy who showed Ayako to her room. Other than him, the hotel seemed completely empty. The bellboy mentioned that a composer was staying in the room upstairs, but assured her there wouldn't be any noise. The thought of a composer brought to mind the sound of music, but the one upstairs was apparently different. He composed entirely in his head, without needing to produce a single sound. That night, in this super quiet environment, Ayako began her work. What she didn't realize was that the sound of her typewriter had now become the sole source of noise in the entire hotel. Everyone noticed it, even a chicken. The next day, Ayako went to a lawn near the hotel. While enjoying the beautiful scenery, she brainstormed the final scenes of her story, debating whether the hero and heroine should end up together and how it should happen. As she got lost in her own internal conflict, her self-talk grew louder and louder. Her excited voice startled the chickens a boy was feeding, but she didn't notice. Her chatter disturbed the old man downstairs, but she was oblivious. The sound of her typing annoyed an older woman, but Ayako just told her to leave the food and she would eat after she finished writing. As the woman was about to leave, Ayako asked her to bring over a tape recorder, promising she would use headphones. The woman, though clearly annoyed, went to get it for her. Another night passed to the sound of Ayako's typing. The old man, suffering in the noise, glanced at the equally agitated composer. They exchanged a look of shared agony without saying a word. Finally, on the third day, in this beautiful and silent environment, Ayako finished her novel. She excitedly called her editor, asking him to pick her up the next day along with the manuscript. That evening, Ayako celebrated by opening a bottle of red wine. And with wine, of course, comes music. After a glass, she was feeling tipsy and remarked that being too quiet wasn't so great after all. She completely forgot about the headphones. Suddenly, eggs started flying towards her. As Ayako sat paralyzed with shock, the composer walked in through the main door holding an axe. They were the people who had been tormented by her noise. After 3 days, they couldn't bear it any longer. With one swing, the composer smashed the tape recorder to pieces. But that wasn't enough. He then advanced towards Ayako. The next moment, the world seemed to become much quieter. The family of 3 felt a sense of peace and relief. From then on, the place seemed to become a sanctuary of silence, utterly still except for the sound of heartbeats. As for Ayako, she was now writing her manuscripts with a fountain pen. That's where the story ends. The lesson Ayako learned that night must have been a profound one. The sixth story begins with Saori shopping and being so captivated by a beautiful fur coat in a boutique window that she couldn't walk away. Unfortunately, her wallet was empty, so she headed to her friend's house instead. There, she discovered that her two best friends had each bought a fur coat from abroad, one for $300,000 and the other for $600,000. The friend with the more expensive coat had even brought Saori a souvenir, a crocodile wallet. She explained it was a local specialty and wished her good fortune with money. She even put a coin inside for good luck. Then the two friends started planning to wear their fur coats to a party the next day, boasting about how they would stun everyone. Hearing this, Saori grew sour. She remarked that in Western countries, wearing fur was frowned upon due to environmental concerns. Her friend, who had just given her a gift, told her not to say such things and offered to let her borrow a fur coat if she wanted to wear one. Saori was furious. She decided she didn't want the crocodile wallet after all. She resentfully remarked that if they loved fur so much, they should just turn into cats or dogs. With that, she flung the wallet away. By a stroke of bad luck, it landed on the offering box of a nearby shrine. The wallet popped open, and the coin fell perfectly inside. In the next moment, a flash of white light erupted from the offering box. Saori's wish had been granted. The fur coat on her friend wouldn't come off. It clung to her tightly, the suffocating feeling causing her immense pain. The next day, she went missing. The day after, Saori and her other friend went to look for her but couldn't find her. Instead, they found a dog in her apartment. They didn't know when their friend had gotten a dog, but with her sudden disappearance, the party was still on. Saori was meant to go wearing the 600,000 yen coat, but she felt awkward about it. So her friend suggested a swap. Saori would wear her less expensive coat and she would wear the 600,000 yen one. Dressed in the fur coats, both women's elegance was instantly elevated. At the party that night, they caught the attention of two heirs to a hospital fortune. One of them, driving a Mercedes-Benz, took Saori home and invited her to dinner again the next night, with the condition that she wear the same fur coat. Seeing the man's expression change, Saori quickly lied, saying the coat her friend was wearing was actually hers. The man's face immediately brightened, but while Saori was being dropped off, her friend, who had just gotten home, met a terrible fate. The suffocating feeling of the 600,000 yen coat returned. So on the third day, when Saori went to her friend's apartment to return the coat, she found that she too had disappeared. And just like before, there was a cat in her apartment. As Saori tried to pet it, she suddenly remembered her friend once saying she hated cats and dogs. Recalling her own careless words from that night, Saori was struck with a terrible premonition. She ran out of the building, but somehow she found herself in front of the shrine again. Stranger still, she was now mysteriously wearing the fur coat herself. She ignored the coat, her eyes fixed on the crocodile wallet she had thrown away. She rushed over to retrieve it, only to find the coin was gone. Frantically, she started shaking the offering box, trying to get the coin out. Just then, a police officer appeared and stopped her. In a state of panic, Saori gave him a push. The officer fell to the ground, dead like a piece of shit. Horrified, Saori tried to rip the fur coat off, but terrifyingly, it wouldn't come off. Then, with another flash of white light, Saori was transformed into a small cat or dog. A few days later, the very same fur coat appeared in a second-hand fur shop, the one Saori had been staring at before. At that moment, a woman took a liking to the coat and tried it on. As the shop owner gave a mysterious smile, the woman's fate seemed sealed. The seventh story begins with two men waiting nervously outside a hospital maternity ward. With the sound of two babies crying, they both jumped to their feet. A nurse announced the birth of their children, a boy and a girl. It was Christmas Day, and these two children were born on the same day, in the same month of the same year. The boy was named Shuji, and the girl, Akiko. They met for the second time when they were 1 year old, but they were too young to understand what love was. At 4, they met again, and the seeds of affection had begun to sprout. But because Shuji lacked courage, by the time they were 5, another boy was by Akiko's side, pushing her on the swings. At 7, Shuji was too scared to play a game that even the girls dared to try. He disappointed Akiko and became known as a coward among his friends. At 13, they passed each other like strangers, and Shuji could only hide his feelings in his heart. The same thing happened when they were 14. But at 15, as they passed each other again, Akiko called out to him and asked for his second button. Without hesitation, Shuji gave it to her. The love he had hidden for so long erupted like lava. He went to see a fortune teller who told him that the mark of love had appeared on him, meaning someone loved him. Shuji was 16 at the time. Overjoyed, he went to find Akiko, only to discover she already had someone else. Shuji was heartbroken, a blow he felt for 2 consecutive years. At 17, another girl was by his side. She asked if he was really dropping out of school. He replied that he had already found a job at a repair shop. Shuji became rebellious, but this girl stayed by his side. At 18, she asked if he was really quitting his job at the factory. He answered that he could support himself by gambling. That year was Akiko's coming-of-age ceremony, and she also went to see the fortune teller. After a chant, the fortune teller told Akiko that she had a fated person in her life. Though she hadn't realized it yet, he might be right beside her. Akiko was ecstatic, assuming the fortune teller meant the man she was with. And indeed, when Akiko was 23, the man proposed to her, and she had no reason to refuse. That same year, the other girl became pregnant with Shuji's child and asked if he would marry her. In the end, Shuji acted despicably. He kept the child but did not marry the woman. Many years passed. They were both 30. Shuji's child had grown and Akiko was preparing for a divorce. One day, they met by chance in a park. Thankfully, they recognized each other. Akiko was in a hurry to finalize her divorce, so before leaving, she asked Shuji if he came to the park often. After he said yes, they parted ways. From then on, whenever she had free time, Akiko would come to the park and sit, holding the button from all those years ago, lost in thought. But for some reason, though she waited for a long time, Shuji never appeared. Unconsciously, snow began to fall from the sky. Akiko's heart felt as cold as the weather. As she sat there, she didn't notice the sound of an ambulance siren echoing through the city. It's deduced that Shuji was hit in an accident. Decades passed. In all that time, Shuji never reappeared. But Akiko had developed a habit of coming to sit in the park. This year, Akiko was 80. One day, an old man and his grandson came to the park. The old man, seeing Akiko on the bench, struck up a conversation. He said that even though he was 80, he felt like he had forgotten something very important, but couldn't quite remember what it was. He wondered if everyone got forgetful in old age. Akiko chuckled and said she was the same. Though her hands were busy knitting, she had no idea what she was making. The 2 elderly people chatted idly until Shuji's grandson came to pull him away. It was then that Shuji noticed a button next to Akiko's basket. He didn't remember the button, but it felt strangely familiar. He had a feeling that if he stayed with the old woman, he might remember the important thing he had forgotten. So just as Akiko had asked him many years ago, he asked her if she would be there tomorrow. Akiko replied that she came every day. Shuji said he would see her tomorrow then, feeling that being with her would help him remember. As Shuji got up to leave, Akiko seemed to recognize him. Visibly moved, she called out to him and told him she had decided what to knit, a bright red scarf. After the old man and his grandson had walked away, the grandson asked who the old lady was. Shuji, his voice filled with an irrepressible excitement, replied that she was a new friend he had just made. At 80, just as he had at 18, he was feeling the first stirrings of love for Akiko again. But they never met again. On Christmas night, they both passed away peacefully. At the funeral, Shuji's grandson came and found a button on the ground, the very one Akiko had asked for all those years ago. In the funeral home, the boy saw Akiko's granddaughter and gave the button to her. And that's where the story ends. It seems a love that was fated but unfulfilled in one generation may continue in the next. It's not clear whether Shuji's grandson is braver than Shuji or if the girl will choose the boy this time. The 8th story begins with Hana being hospitalized after a car accident. The person who hit her, said to be a politician, never showed up. Not wanting to escalate the matter, he had others handle everything and arranged for Hana to be admitted to a special hospital. This hospital was established to research an integrated medical system, and ordinary people couldn't get in. Here, patients underwent thorough examinations from every possible angle, with a treatment plan aimed at complete and total recovery before discharge. Hana's boyfriend didn't fully understand, but as long as it could heal his girlfriend, he was fine with it. Hana had even less to say since the accident was partly her fault for not following traffic rules. Hearing this, the hospital had them sign a consent form stating that during her treatment, Hana agreed to follow all of the hospital's instructions. With the nurse's explanation, Hana didn't hesitate to sign. The next day, as Hana sat by the window watching other patients exercise, she started to feel hungry. When she looked up, she saw a nurse already wheeling in her food. The nurse simply said that they understood the patient's feelings. It seemed like a normal comment, but Hana could never have imagined how terrifying that statement truly was. When she was about to eat, she had trouble using her chopsticks due to her injuries. The nurse immediately sat down beside her and began to feed her. This level of meticulous care made Hana feel both flattered and overwhelmed. But the nurse casually told her it was her job and that Hana should feel free to be more relaxed. Gradually, nurses even began helping Hana button her clothes. Her boyfriend found this behavior strange, but Hana explained that it was what the nurses were supposed to do, and relying on them made their work easier. She remarked how comfortable life was, saying she could stay there forever. During a visit, Hana wanted something cold to drink and asked her boyfriend to buy it. But just as he was about to open the door, a nurse walked in carrying 2 cold drinks. Her boyfriend was astonished. Hana just gave him a knowing look. That night, Hana was awakened by a beeping sound in her head. When she woke up, she discovered something had been implanted under her scalp. Before she could touch it, a nurse entered the room. The nurse explained it was a sensor and told her not to touch it, as it provided them with real-time updates on the patient's brainwave changes. This allowed them to anticipate and fulfill the patient's needs. Hana panicked, asking if this meant they would know everything she was thinking. She demanded they remove the device, telling them not to install such things without her permission. But the nurse replied that everyone had one, as it helped them accurately understand the patient's needs. When Hana tried to argue further, the nurse told her she was overreacting and gave her a sedative to help her sleep. The next day, Hana told her boyfriend what had happened, saying she felt constantly monitored and uncomfortable. Her boyfriend, however, didn't seem concerned and even teased her about her earlier comment about wanting to stay there forever. He told her to just endure it for a little longer. Once she was discharged, they could get married. Hearing this, Hana's mood brightened. But just then, the television turned on by itself, and the screen was filled with beautiful images related to marriage. As Hana watched, she seemed to be enjoying it immensely. It was then that her boyfriend realized how deeply unsettling the situation was. He went to the hospital director and requested Hana's discharge. The director said she could be discharged as long as a full-body examination showed no abnormalities. However, after the checkup, they found that Hana had slight muscle atrophy and poor digestion. The hospital recommended she stay for further observation. When her boyfriend tried to object, the director produced the consent form Hana had signed. Her boyfriend argued that these were minor issues that almost everyone has, but the director stated that while that may be true for others, anyone in this hospital had to be completely cured. So Hana had to stay. Gradually, the hospital began to prevent her boyfriend from visiting her. When Hana called to ask why he hadn't come, he explained helplessly that the hospital claimed his visits were hindering her treatment and that not complying with their instructions would only delay her discharge. Just as her boyfriend was about to say something about the hospital, the phone signal suddenly cut out. Hana didn't understand what had happened. Just then, a nurse entered the room again. Another shot of sedative, and all of Hana's questions were no longer questions. That night, Hana had a dream. She dreamt that her boyfriend got married, but the bride wasn't her. The terrifying nightmare woke her up. But upon waking for a moment, she couldn't remember who the man in her dream was, only that it was a strange dream. After some time had passed, the hospital conducted another full-body examination on Hana. She was anxious about the results, and when a nurse approached, she quickly asked for the outcome. The nurse told her there were no major issues and she was mostly healthy, but she had a small canker sore in her mouth. Therefore, she would need to remain hospitalized for further observation. Hana replied that it was wonderful news, as it meant she didn't have to be discharged. With that, the nurse pushed her away in her wheelchair, her face completely expressionless. The 9th story begins on his way home. A man named Sato, noticing a sticker that read, "Searching for Sato." After that, his life took a downturn. First, at work, an important project he had been managing for a long time was suddenly handed over to a newcomer named Suzuki. Then, his estranged wife finally filed for divorce. That evening after work, Sato saw the sticker again. After much hesitation, he decided to call the number on it. The next day, following the instructions from the phone call, he arrived at a villa in the suburbs. He was greeted by a sexy woman. Sato, recently divorced, was immediately taken with her. As the sexy woman led him inside, Sato realized that this was the headquarters of a group called the Sato Society. To join, he just needed to provide anything that could prove he was a Sato, such as an ID card, driver's license, or student ID. As its name suggested, the Sato Society was an association composed of people with the surname Sato. Their goal was to pool all their resources to create a world where Satos could live more comfortably. The founder of the society came every day to give lectures, which they called vitalization sessions. However, Sato was not fond of any of this. It all felt a bit like a pyramid scheme to him. The sexy woman seemed to sense his thoughts, so she took his sensitive hand and told him that from now on, everything would go smoothly for him. Her touch seemed to invigorate him, not the founder's lecture, but the sexy woman's sensitive touch. But strangely enough, after Sato joined the society, his life did begin to change dramatically. The Sato Society had members everywhere. One day, by coincidence, an important client they were hosting turned out to be a member. When the client learned that Suzuki, not Sato, was in charge of his account, he flew into a rage. He declared that he had only agreed to the partnership because he thought a Sato was in charge. If Suzuki was handling it, the deal was off. Just like that, Sato was put back in charge of the important project. One day, Sato asked the sexy woman out for dinner. On their way home that night, they were accosted by thugs. But just as they were about to get beaten up, the thugs realized Sato was a member of the Sato Society. They immediately backed off, asking why he hadn't said he was a Sato sooner. After checking his credentials, they insisted on checking the sexy woman's as well. Upon discovering they were both from the Sato Society, the thugs wished them well, hoping they would have children soon to help expand the society, and then left. After that, everything seemed to be going well, until the founder announced that there was a spy from the rival Suzuki Society in their midst. He claimed this was a matter of life and death for the Sato Society, as the Suzukis were jealous of their recent success and had secretly sent in an infiltrator. Hearing this, the members began to murmur. Soon after, several members revealed themselves as spies. The enraged Satos decided to teach these traitors a lesson, and the hall descended into chaos. But at that critical moment, reporters and the police arrived, and just like that, the Sato Society was finished. That night, Sato sat exhaustedly under the "Searching for Sato" sticker near his apartment. Before long, the sexy woman dressed flamboyantly appeared before him to flex her sexy figure. Sato immediately stood up, full of concern for her. But as it turned out, the woman confessed that she was indeed the spy, but a sexy one. She had been the one to call the reporters and the police. She explained that after all she had been through, she was finally getting married to a Suzuki, who was a member of the Suzuki Society. She said it would be disastrous if the Sato Society were allowed to grow. With that, Suzuki tore down the "Searching for Sato" sticker and replaced it with one that read, "Searching for Suzuki." And that's where the story ends. Sato was left in disbelief, but the rise of the Suzukis was something he couldn't stop. In the end, his trust had been misplaced. The 10th story begins with Wada feeling exhausted, as if there wasn't enough time in the day. His clients, all much older than him, were incredibly energetic. Sometimes he wondered if they were raised on livestock feed, as they never seemed to get tired. When he got home, Wada felt like he had just lain down when his alarm clock for work went off. Looking at the newspaper in front of him, he worried that he might die from overwork. At the office, despite timing his arrival perfectly, the time card he punched showed he was several minutes late. Wada was baffled. Just then, a colleague came over and asked why he was dawdling. If he didn't hurry, he'd be late for the meeting. That night, while playing games with a client, he looked down for a moment to light a cigarette. When he looked up, everyone was gone. He wondered what had happened as he was just about to start smoking. A colleague appeared and told him he had just seen them all off in a car. Wada started to think he was so tired that his reaction time had slowed down. Later, after a long day, Wada finally returned home. Despite the strange occurrences of the past 2 days, he was happy to be done with work. Feeling good, he decided to have a beer to unwind. But he had only taken 1 sip of beer and 1 bite of a carrot when the sun suddenly rose. It was then that Wada realized the problem wasn't with him, but with time itself. But he couldn't understand why it was only happening to him. At the office, his boss started another boring meeting. Wada felt like he had just sat down when the meeting ended. He wondered why it had finished so quickly, but his colleague complained about how exhausting it was, saying the meeting had lasted for 3 hours. Wada thought that this side effect at least had its benefits, but his good mood didn't last. He had a meeting with a client scheduled for 3 p.m., but by the time he got downstairs, it was already 4:30. For missing the appointment, Wada was severely reprimanded by his boss, who then reassigned all of his projects to his subordinate. Wada was now in charge of simple data entry. The moment he got the data, Wada buried his head in his work. A long time later, when he finally finished everything, the sky seemed to have just begun to lighten. Seeing this, Wada's good mood returned. After freshening up, he went to the office, only to find his colleagues and boss staring at him strangely. His boss asked why he had taken a day off when he was supposed to finish the work in one day. It turned out Wada's sense of time hadn't returned to normal. In fact, it seemed to be getting worse. After that, Wada started taking more work home with him. Perhaps afraid of falling asleep, he began taping his eyes open. He kept taping them, and eventually, he stopped going to work altogether. When his boss noticed Wada had been absent for several days, he sent a colleague, a man with glasses, to check on him. What he found was shocking. Wada's reactions were so slow that the man thought he was dead. He called for an ambulance. The paramedics who arrived noted that Wada's condition was very strange. His heart rate and pulse were incredibly slow, as if he were dying, with only a single breath keeping him alive. Suddenly, the man with glasses saw Wada smile. A doctor glanced over and concluded that Wada was done for, as the smile was likely a sign of rigor mortis. The 11th story begins with the last day of the holidays. Miho, who had just returned from a trip and was struggling with jet lag, had no desire to get up. The phone in her room rang and was answered automatically. The caller was a computer-generated voice that sounded strange and perverted. It asked what she wore to sleep and if she slept naked. Angrily, Miho picked up the phone and demanded to know who it was, saying they had been calling every day while she was away. She warned that whoever it was, they should stop the prank calls, or she would call the police. She then hung up and went back to bed, but she had barely lain down when the doorbell rang. It was her next-door neighbor, who explained he had been signing for her packages while she was gone and had brought them over. Without waiting for an invitation, he walked right into her home. After putting down the packages, he started making small talk. Although Miho didn't want to engage, she felt obligated to be polite since they were neighbors and answered his questions sparingly. When it became clear he wasn't going to leave, Miho had to politely ask him to go. That afternoon, the harassing phone call came again. This time, the caller knew what clothes she was wearing, what she was doing, and where she had been on vacation. This made Miho realize she was being watched. She immediately closed all the curtains in her house, but it didn't help. Left with no other choice, Miho called the police. A short while later, before the police arrived, a pizza delivery man showed up claiming she had an order. But Miho hadn't ordered anything. Before she could say so, the man pushed his way into her apartment, insisting she accept the delivery. He also tried to chat with her about things unrelated to the order. Fortunately, the police arrived at that moment. Seeing the officer, the delivery man stopped pestering her and quickly left. After he was gone, the officer began to question her, asking if she had a boyfriend and suggesting it might be an ex-boyfriend harassing her out of spite. As they were talking, the doorbell rang again. It was a plumber to fix the pipes. He was very polite while the officer was there, but the moment the officer left, he asked to use the toilet. Although Miho quickly hid her underwear, the plumber managed to find a stray pair. Holding up her panties, he said she had left them in the bathroom. He then mocked the police officer, calling him a fool and asking what would happen if he himself were a pervert. He remarked on how neat and beautiful her apartment was and said he would take his time with the job today. Hearing him say he would take his time, Miho was stunned, wondering why she was just that attractive and why every man was acting this way. The plumber was true to his word and took a very long time to finish. But even after he was done, he showed no intention of leaving. He smoked a cigarette, drank a beer, and then rummaged through her trash, commenting on the lack of used condoms. He claimed he could tell her personality just by the scent of her perfume. The man's lewd comments terrified Miho. Fortunately, he didn't do anything drastic to her. After she asked him to leave again, he finally departed reluctantly. When she went downstairs to take out the trash, she was unlucky enough to be sprayed with water by a man washing his car. The man apologized and offered to wash her clothes for her while she was still wearing them. Miho was both ashamed and furious, unable to believe that the man could make such an outrageous suggestion. But when she returned home, she was even more shocked to find her neighbor had let himself in without asking. In the short time she was gone, he had already cooked a meal. She panicked, telling him that even as a neighbor, he couldn't just enter her home without permission. The neighbor argued that he had brought her food and collected so many packages for her, so how could she say that to him? As the neighbor advanced on her, Miho stumbled backward and fell onto the bed. She quickly got up and fought back, stabbing him in the stomach with a knife. At this, both of them calmed down. One lay on the ground, screaming in pain, while the other sat on the floor, completely stunned. Then the neighbor called the police. Miho was taken away. The one thing that didn't change was the harassing phone call that came again that night, and that's where the story ends. The 12th story begins with Narita being a busy man who worked late every night. After everyone else in the office had left, he would call home. Hearing that his wife was making his favorite beef stew, he would quickly finish up and head back. When he got home, he was greeted by his wife's complaints. She wondered when his grueling schedule would end, worrying that he would wear himself out before he could earn much money. Narita would just brush it off, saying it would be over soon. Once this project was finished, he could finally rest. After dinner, he fell asleep. Perhaps due to his recent exhaustion, he overslept. The next day, he was running late for work. In his rush, he left his ID, driver's license, and other documents at home. He had a very important meeting that day, but when he arrived at the company, he saw the clients were already preparing to leave. Narita was horrified. He thought his career was over. He might as well pack his bags and go home. However, when his boss saw him, his reaction was completely different from what Narita had expected. His boss praised him, saying he had done a great job and that even the senior managing director was impressed. He told him to keep up the good work. Narita was utterly confused. Back at his desk, his section chief came over to compliment him as well, praising his meticulous data collection. Narita had inexplicably become a role model for his colleagues, but he had no idea what had happened. At noon, Narita went to meet another client, but his arrival also baffled the client, who asked why he had come again. He explained that Narita had already given him the price quote during lunch earlier. After that, Narita left in a daze. He tried to call his office to figure out what was going on, but the person who answered the phone was also named Narita. Stunned, Narita suddenly found himself with nothing to do. He spent the entire afternoon sitting in a park, but no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out why there was another version of himself, one who had managed to handle all his work for him. Lost in thought, he wandered onto the street. Suddenly, a group of women called out to him, addressing him as section chief, and said he had been the star of today's sales meeting. Narita was completely bewildered, not knowing how he had become a section chief. He nervously broke away from the women and lit a cigarette, fuming with anger. When he got home and opened the door, Narita noticed an extra pair of black leather shoes by the entrance, the same model as his own. He heard his wife and another man talking flirtatiously inside. Hearing the man's voice, Narita panicked and ran away for his shitty life, as if he didn't treat it as his own home. He went downstairs and just stood there foolishly, looking up at his apartment. His behavior attracted the attention of the police. They took him to the station for questioning. When they asked for identification, he had none. So they decided to call his home to verify his identity. But Narita's wife told them her husband was already home. In the end, with his identity in question, Narita was detained overnight by the police. A lot could have happened at home that night. The next morning, Narita was finally released. When he got home, his wife was surprised to see him, asking why he wasn't at work at this hour. Narita didn't answer. Just looking at his wife made him angry. He confronted her about the phone call around 10 p.m. the previous night and the flirty man who was with her. But his wife looked confused, saying she hadn't received any calls and that she didn't get home until after 11 p.m. So who was in their house at that time? His wife held up a sweater and asked what he thought. Narita asked when she had started knitting. She replied that she had always been knitting and was now making beef stew. Narita was confused since they just had beef stew a few days ago. As he was lost in thought, his wife brought him a cup of coffee. Seeing her add sugar, Narita was perplexed since his wife always says she was on a diet and avoided sugar. So why was she adding so much now? His wife said she always took sugar and had never been on a diet. Hearing this and seeing the strange look on his wife's face, a chill ran down Narita's spine all the way to his smelly butt. He realized that his wife might not be the same wife he knew before, and that's where the story ends. The 13th story begins with the police receiving a report from a woman claiming her 5-year-old child had been kidnapped. Upon receiving the news, the police quickly arrived at the scene to set up surveillance. They were waiting for the kidnapper to call again. In the meantime, an officer instructed the woman to remain calm when the kidnapper called and, crucially, not to reveal that the police were there. Halfway through his instructions, the kidnapper's call came in. The voice on the other end demanded a ransom of $20 million. The woman agreed. After all, as long as she could get her child back, the money wasn't an issue. But she needed the kidnapper to guarantee her child's safety, so she asked to hear his voice. After a brief pause, the kidnapper agreed, saying he would call back later. Just then, the woman's husband returned home. Seeing the numerous police officers in his house, he knew his wife was having another episode. He explained to the police that their child had passed away a year ago. His wife had suffered a severe emotional shock, and her mental state had deteriorated. Since then, she had been acting as if their child were still alive. The husband was also heartbroken and didn't know how to comfort his wife, so he had been playing along. But today, his wife had suddenly called the police, claiming their child was missing. The police then understood that the kidnapping was not real. But who was the person on the phone? Since no child had been kidnapped, they couldn't stay long. But just as they were packing up to leave, the kidnapper called again. This time, the voice of a child could be heard on the line. Interestingly, the voice was very familiar to the couple. It was truly the voice of their deceased son. The kidnapper told them to prepare the money and that he would call back in 3 hours with instructions for the exchange. After the call ended, the husband was shaken. Although he couldn't understand what was happening, the voice on the phone was undoubtedly his son's. Fortunately, the police equipment had not been completely removed. This time, they were able to trace the call and pinpoint the kidnapper's location. With this information, they decided to investigate. The truth would be revealed once they met face to face. When they arrived at the location, they found that the traced address belonged to a household with 2 residents, a 70-year-old mother and her 45-year-old son. They assumed the kidnapper was the son. To ensure the safety of the hostage, they didn't act rashly, instead setting up a perimeter and waiting for the kidnapper to emerge. While waiting, the senior officer shared a story. When he was a child, he had a friend who always played with his younger sister. When the sister suddenly died, the friend was so heartbroken that he would often talk to the air as if his sister were still with him. It was a way of escaping reality. As they were talking, they didn't see the kidnapper, but they did see the old woman leave the house. They quickly apprehended her and used her to gain entry into the home. They searched the attic and the son's room. But when the police were about to subdue the kidnapper, everyone was shocked by what they saw. The kidnapper was a mummified corpse. The old woman, however, seemed oblivious and urged her dead son to apologize to the police. The scene was so bizarre that the entire police team was bewildered. Earlier, they had all heard the voices of the kidnapper and the child, and they had recorded it. But when they returned to the station, the recordings had mysteriously vanished. While everyone was trying to make sense of it, the old woman arrived at the station. She was worried about her son. A junior officer was about to tell her the truth, but the senior officer stopped him. He told the old woman a white lie, saying her son was fine and that he would speak to his superiors about the situation. The old woman was overjoyed and left, full of gratitude. The senior officer walked out with her. After the senior officer left, the junior officer received a phone call. It was from the senior officer's wife, asking when he would be home. The chief, overhearing this, was shocked. He revealed that the senior officer's wife had died of cancer long ago. In the final scene, the senior officer is at home. The house is empty, but the senior officer is talking to himself, as if he can see someone. He is presumably talking to his deceased wife. The 14th story begins with a man running a private academy specializing in reforming delinquent youths. One day, 3 new youths arrived at the academy. Like their predecessors, they were defiant. The man wasn't bothered by this. He was used to it. He was confident that after his training, these youths would be completely transformed. However, when one of the youths spat chewing gum onto his headscarf, the man snapped. After a beating with a stick, the youths became much more obedient and compliant, though they still weren't convinced in their hearts. But the man didn't care about that. His goal was to make money and within 3 days find a way to torment these kids until they left. As for the mental strength he preached, it was all nonsense. What he truly loved was money. Leaving the room, he discovered the youths were secretly smoking. Since they had been caught, punishment was unavoidable. That night, they had to sleep with the lights on, listening to a DJ. A few days later, it was time for water training. The man claimed that with enough concentration, one could hold their breath underwater for several minutes, even 10 or more. The youths didn't believe his smelly bullshit and challenged him to demonstrate. If he couldn't do it, he was a fraud. The man had anticipated this, so without arguing, he got into the water. But where they couldn't see, he secretly took out a small oxygen canister from his pocket. 5 minutes passed, then another 5. The man decided that was enough time. He put away the oxygen canister and calmly emerged from the water. When he got out, he noticed the way the 3 youths looked at him had changed. They were amazed by what he had done and now fully believed in his so-called mental strength. In the following days, they were incredibly cooperative, striving to meet every demand the man made. But after a few days, while the youths were fine, the man himself couldn't take it anymore. He had planned to get rid of them in 3 days and then take his wife on vacation. Now, that was all ruined. Fed up, the man decided to give them a really tough challenge. He took the youths into the mountains for training. He had them hang from ropes and meditate on the edge of a cliff, claiming that meditating in such a place would enhance their mental strength. Seeing the youth's unwavering determination, the man was furious. He took off his headscarf to wipe his sweat, but a gust of wind blew it off the cliff. He didn't want to go down to get it, but the youths taunted him, saying he had no guts. When taunting didn't work, the youths simply pushed the man off the cliff. After waiting for a long time without seeing him return, one of the youths concluded that the whole mental strength thing was indeed fake and prepared to leave. But the other youths felt differently. One of them stared intently at the pool of water at the bottom of the cliff. Then, to the astonishment of his friends, he took a leap of faith. He landed safely. Seeing this, the other two youths mustered their courage and jumped as well to demonstrate their mental strength they had built. The 15th story begins in a restaurant where a man was enjoying a pleasant meal with his wife and child. Spreading his hands, the man declared he was full, but not wanting to waste food, he still needed to finish what was left on his daughter's plate. Just then, his hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and strange images flashed through his mind. He then started to eat ravenously, completely out of control. But the more he ate, the hungrier and more uncomfortable he became. Yet the sight of food still made him want to eat. This episode only subsided after he returned home. His wife, concerned, asked what had happened. The man was just as confused. He explained that he had experienced sudden ringing in his ears, his vision had turned white, and then he had felt an overwhelming hunger for no reason. In the end, his wife concluded that he must have been too tired lately. Seeing his daughter's worried expression, the man managed a happy smile. But as he picked her up, he felt a strange sense of unreality, though he couldn't explain why. The next day at work, he was summoned by his boss, who told him he needed to entertain a very important client that day. The man was to come along to make up the numbers. His boss said the restaurant was already booked, and the man should just go there after finishing his work. Hearing that he had to eat again, the man hesitated, worried that his condition would act up again. But without a meal and some drinks, how could they close this major deal? That evening, the client was very pleased with their arrangements and was ready to sign the contract at the dinner table. But just then, the steaks were served. The man, who had been trying to restrain himself, finally lost control at the sight of the steak. His hands began to shake again, and the strange images flashed in his mind. Then, without regard for the situation, he began to eat voraciously. This greatly displeased the client, who was about to sign the contract. His boss tried to intervene, but the man simply couldn't stop. The client, feeling disrespected, stood up to leave. Seeing the client walk out and the deal fall through, the boss was furious. But at that moment, the man couldn't care less. His eyes, his mind, and even his stomach were filled with only one thing: food. He just wanted to eat. In the end, he was fired by his boss. After returning to normal, the man sat at home, filled with guilt. His wife cried in front of him, saying their family depended on him, and now he was unemployed. Their daughter would start elementary school next year, and they still had 30 years of mortgage payments. She begged him to pull himself together and not to leave them. His wife's plea not to leave triggered a memory in the man. Looking at a picture on the wall, he saw a group photo from a mountain climbing trip. But strangely, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't make out the faces of the people in the photo. In an instant, his mind was flooded with images again. Snowy mountains, a struggle. He had another attack. He began searching for food and eating frantically. Finally, he fainted. In a haze, he heard his wife making a phone call. Soon after, a car arrived at the door, and the man was led into it in a daze. As he sat in the car, he heard his wife's voice again, telling him not to leave. When he turned to look at his wife and daughter behind him, he saw they were dressed in black, their faces filled with sorrow. The man panicked and tried to get out of the car, but it wouldn't stop and drove further and further away. Then, the man felt as if he had arrived at a hospital. Doctors examined him and found all his vital signs to be normal. They had him eat while under an imaging machine, and what they saw shocked them. All the food that entered his stomach simply disappeared. It was strange and inexplicable. Before they could study it further, the man struggled free and ran out of the hospital. He needed to find more to eat. By chance, he saw a food delivery truck. He immediately ran over, tore open the boxes, and started eating voraciously. But still, the more he ate, the hungrier he became. And this time, he noticed that the food seemed to have no taste and didn't satisfy his hunger at all. With a look of despair, the man finally returned to reality. He was trapped on a snowy mountain. His companion had been dead in front of him for a long time. Everything before, his family, his job, the hospital, had been a hallucination. He was cold and hungry, desperately eating snow. But the snow provided no nourishment and only made his condition worse. In the end, the man repeatedly whispered his wife and daughter's names, and with a sense of unwillingness and despair, he closed his eyes. And that is where the story ends. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.